Okay, so my journey started, as Anya said, in 2013. I was interested in Bitcoin and I started trading cryptocurrencies and altcoins. As you saw in one of Simone's last slides, there's been this huge explosion of other currencies. At the time I started trading, there were only about 100. Now there are more than 1,300. I kind of ended up in this space accidentally. I'm a software engineer, and when I started trading, I found a real problem with all the different exchanges and all the different wallets and so on was keeping track of what I had where. So I wrote a little script to kind of pull the different prices from the APIs of the various crypto exchanges, and then it turned into a kind of web app, countmycrypto.com, and other people started using it, and then all of a sudden I found I was talking to all these different people in the community, and I sort of disappeared down a rabbit hole of reading everything I could, just kind of trying to get hands-on with it and so on. And through that, I co-founded London Women in Bitcoin, just to get a few more women interested in it. So anyway, I'm not actually going to talk about cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, or not very much. As you're probably aware, there are lots of other uses for blockchain tech other than purely financial. So I want to just take a little diversion into all the amazing things that it might be possible to do in the future with blockchain tech. There are caveats around this, but I'm asking you to suspend your disbelief just for the duration of the talk. So, luckily, Simone has done a lot of the legwork for me in explaining so much of the principles of it. So I'll probably skip through my first slides quite quickly. When you're doing a talk at a blockchain event, you never know how much pre-explaining you're going to have to do, but the amazing scheduling means that we've had our introduction to the technology. So I do think it's important. I think it's possibly not the case so much this year, but over the past couple of years, there was definitely a trend as larger corporations started digging into the technology for people not to mention badly spelt Bitcoin, sorry about that. It was as if blockchain was a trendy word, but somehow people didn't want to talk about Bitcoin because people perceived it to have something of a kind of sketchy past. I could talk for a long time about the importance of financial freedom and so on, but I'll just give you a few kind of fun facts about Bitcoin, spelled correctly on this slide. It's peer-to-peer money. Transferring value is the easiest use case to understand. So before I start talking about smart contracts, hardware, sensors, the Internet of Things, it's actually easier, as Simone demonstrated, to sort of show graphically that transferring value via a blockchain type data structure is the kind of easiest thing for people to grasp. Yes, white paper in 2008, first block mined early 2009, persons unknown. Yes, Bitcoin is a currency, although the legislation is different in various countries around the world. It's a sort of shifting sand, but to me, with my economics background, I do think that, yes, it is valid currency. Satoshi is the smallest unit of a Bitcoin, and this fun fact, fascinating. I prepared these slides a few weeks ago because I knew that Anya wanted it early. The Bitcoin pizza dinner is worth $24 million. I'll explain what that is in a minute. Actually, in the weeks since I've done this, which is probably no more than about 4 weeks, the Bitcoin pizza dinner is now worth $43 million. The Bitcoin pizza was it was the first known real-world purchase with Bitcoin, which was 2 pizzas and I think some kind of soda like Coca-Cola or something that cost 10,000 Bitcoin at the time, which was the equivalent of about $20 or $30. These days, the Bitcoin pizza dinner is worth $43 million. And to celebrate this date in May, every year, Bitcoin enthusiasts get together and eat pizza, the idea is you try to go somewhere and buy a pizza with Bitcoin. If you can't, you just go and eat pizza on Bitcoin Pizza Day. I won't go through that. This is a very, very simplified version of what Simone was just showing us, so there's no need for me to labour this point as she explained it so well. So in terms of financial applications, I'm sure there are a lot of people in the audience who are working on, or whose organisations are already working on, use cases such as this for finance. It's worth kind of skipping over these in talking about other use cases, just because it shows the potential value of using blockchain for technology for some of these things. So, for example, in terms of insurance, I'll just pick out a couple of examples. You can imagine, rather than going through a large typical insurance company, you might be able to organise some kind of peer-to-peer insurance. There was a pilot last year for a little shared risk insurance project. There's a big Aetherium conference in New York every year. And the idea was, because obviously you're more likely to get people wanting to participate in this from an audience of people who are going to an Aetherium conference, a message went out offering people who were interested in insuring against the risk of their flight being delayed. They could send a small amount of money to an Aetherium smart contract, which I know we're going to look at in more detail probably later today. And then the application that was handling that would read information from the APIs of the different airlines, and if the flight was delayed, the smart contract would automatically pay out compensation for the flight without having to go through the whole thing of an insurance company, loss adjusters and so on. It was an experiment, and it was a successful experiment, and it's kind of an illustration of the type of uses which people are talking about smart contract technology for. Obviously, a lot of the big banks are looking at blockchain for doing settlements, because it means that they don't have to trust. It removes the need for some kind of trust in the different parties. And if you have a shared ledger, which is one source of truth for many organizations, it's a much more efficient way of processing payments and so on. Shareholder voting, there was a NASDAQ project, I think about 18 months ago, for allowing shareholders of small non-listed tech companies to organise shareholder voting via blockchain tech and digitisation of assets. So being able, not just transferring money via blockchain, but being able to transfer assets themselves, having a sort of digital version of an asset which could be transferred via blockchain. So all very good, all very interesting. Simone touched on smart contracts as a term. Essentially, a smart contract is not actually a contract. It is a script. And the idea is that on a network such as Aetherium, which is a public network that anyone can join, anyone can download the Aetherium code and run it. The reward for that, of course, is the potential to earn money by mining, as it's called. So the idea of the Aetherium virtual machine is that it is a worldwide computer that anyone can join, and the scripts that run on it are executed in many places at once. This gives rise to problems of scalability, which is a talk, probably at least another hour's talk on how these things might be solved. But you can kind of see with the principle of the way Aetherium and similar networks work that we're just entering the infancy of this technology that could be transformational. So a lot of the use cases that people are talking about and writing about and starting to develop at the moment are perhaps not instantly deployable at scale, but it's the it's the people who are thinking about this and coming up with these ideas and starting these projects which are going to be applicable once the technology catches up, that are going to be the future leaders in the area. So it's often been said that where we are with blockchain tech is like the internet in 1995 or 1996. I really believe that's the case. So you had people then talking about streaming movies and VR and so on, and everybody was saying, oh, but how's that going to work when all the internet was at the time was kind of text-based Usenet groups, for people who are old enough to remember that. And we're kind of at the same thing with blockchain. People are looking at it and saying, yes, but this doesn't scale, but in future it will. So I'm going to talk you through a few use cases. So in just 3 years, there are projected to be more than 20 billion connected devices in our world. These machines need to exchange information with each other, and often they need to trust each other. If you have a piece of machinery that is dependent on the weather in a certain place or on a geolocation of a device, you need to know that that is trustworthy information. So these network devices need to exchange information. They need to transact with each other. You might have a device that is buying energy or buying something, buying information from another device without humans being involved. I'll talk a little bit more about the intelligent oil pipeline when we get to it, but for me that's probably the best example of why we might need blockchain for the Internet of Things. So one case study which is quite interesting, it's a real life project that was done by Maersk in conjunction with IBM. When one of these ships comes fully laden from China to Europe, it can generate as much as 2 kilograms of paperwork. It can keep dozens, if not hundreds of people in different countries tied up, preparing bills of lading, letters, customs declarations, and so on. So the ultimate vision, if you like, is we're already talking about having driverless ships. So if the cargo was also untouched by human hands, if each container was sealed and its identity registered into a blockchain so that that data was instantly trustworthy by customs authorities in different countries in the world, so that the safety of the cargo and the tax liabilities were met. It's an interesting case for it. And the increasing prevalence of sensors is also making that possible. There's a company in San Francisco that's called Chronicled, and one of their latest projects is to verify with refrigerated goods that the temperature does not drop below a certain level, and each temperature entry is recorded into the blockchain so that this is proof that it's been kept properly. This is one of my favorite illustrations. This was a project using Aetherium that was carried out in a street in Brooklyn, where, as in many streets, there was a sunny side of the street and a shady side of the street. So imagine you're a householder on the shady side of the street and you want to run your washing machine. The people across the road are out for the day. It would be impractical for you to say, I'm going to go over the road and offer them 20 euros to use their power for the day. But these networked, this is just a generic solar panel picture, by the way, it's not a picture of Brooklyn. The idea was that the panels were networked with each other, and they were able to make micropayments directly from one household to another without human intervention. So these kinds of, without people even being aware that they were using their neighbour's electricity. It's a fascinating case. So all people had to do was top up their balance using Aetherium, and then they would be able to ambiently purchase or sell power to their neighbours. This is a bit of a cheat because it was a hackathon winning entry rather than a genuine thing. But I'm really interested that my last 4 years have been spent freelancing as a software engineer on various automotive projects. So I'm really interested in how blockchain and mobility works together. There's also been a project in Berlin for electric car charging stations powered by Aetherium, where the car just goes up and buys the amount of electricity that it wants. This is an example of how, in this case, it was a Tesla, could pay itself when it was just approaching the toll booth. It would make a payment using an Aetherium smart contract as it approached the toll booth. So I was chatting to a friend about this, and he said, you know what would be really cool? It would be if people were driving on the road and your car could just decide to pay, and if you needed to get somewhere in a hurry, your car could theoretically pay another car to overtake it, so that one car stayed back, and so on. My favourite example is the intelligent oil pipeline. So you can imagine loads of people all over the world can have the capacity now with really cheap sensors, cheap weather stations, little home projects, blogs, whatever. Everyone has the capacity to contribute information. So ultimately, instead of having people deciding manually or using analysts, or I know that people use software to do this, but ultimately people are responsible for decisions about where to route oil, because the oil market is so dependent on weather conditions. If it's really cold somewhere, then obviously you need more oil to go there. So you don't want a pipeline, for example, that's sending all of an oil company's oil somewhere where it's not going to be sold. You need to be able to trust that data. So if there is a mechanism for contributing data to from your own sensors or whatever, and that is verified by entries into the blockchain, that gives that element of trust that would otherwise not be there. And ultimately, things like energy pipelines and so on are going to be able to transact more or less independently of people. Like I say, the main issue is scalability. So I was at a meetup in London quite recently where the video messaging service Kik is doing an ICO, which is interesting in its own right because they're probably the biggest established company to do an ICO rather than a startup. Their CEO was over in London and they have millions of users, and we asked him if he was going to use Aetherium for the as the mechanism for their kind of tokenization. And he said, if we were to issue a token to every single one of our users, it would use up the entire capacity of the Aetherium blockchain for 23 days. And that is the reality check of where we are at the moment. All the use cases I've talked about are not theoretically possible right now, but one day they will be. So there are various debates going on about how you solve scalability. I could talk about it for hours. I haven't got hours, but it's really, really worth reading about some of the solutions that people are coming up with. And the other thing is, of course, ethics. All these things I'm talking about, for example, geolocating people by phones, geolocating cars, producing information from all these different sources and recording it irretrievably, untamperably into a blockchain. Well, untamperability brings its own problems because in Germany, you are rightly very, very, very privacy conscious compared with the United Kingdom, for example. You don't see cameras everywhere you go. And this idea that data about people and things and objects is going to be stored into a network, into a data structure forever, brings its own problems, especially when you think about who might or might not have access to it. Just a brief word on alternatives to Ethereum. A couple of interesting projects, IOTA and Filament, two completely different things. Filament actually works off the Bitcoin blockchain, which is interesting. IOTA is not actually a blockchain. It's different architecturally. It's also worth a look. And IBM's Watson project, really worth looking at to see what they're doing. So the future is all robots, drones, sensors, and blockchain. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing when it eventually arrives, you can make your own minds up about that, but the possibilities are there, and they shouldn't be discounted, really. And if you want to start reading about it, I blog quite a lot on my Medium, and there's quite a few links and so on there. So and lots of other resources to read about stuff.